Having some career cravings? Need more spice and fulfillment in your career? Welcome to Career Cravings Talk Show with your host, Dev Ramcharan. Dev and his guests will guide you to achieve those career goals and dreams. Satisfy those cravings. Now, without further ado, meet your host, Dev.
So you're in a situation where you are a millennial going into an interview. You're a little bit nervous, you're stressed, you're thinking to yourself, well, what can I do to prepare? And what are some things that are good do's and don'ts that I need to keep in mind? How should I behave in the interview? And you know what? How should I look when I get into these interview situations? I know that you're going to be sensitive to the fact you're thinking to yourself, well, I do not have 25 years of work experience behind me. I don't have 20 years experience behind me, and I'm a little bit worried about that. We'll get into that, and we'll talk through some of those details. Now, a couple basic things that you should not do. Do not arrive late for the interview. It's really important for you to be there on time. And what I recommend to any clients that I have, particularly to millennials, is try to be there about 10 to 15 minutes early. When you sit out there in the waiting room, you get to have a feel for the rhythm of the company, what people's faces look like. Do they look excited or happy to be at work? Is there a significant amount of stress and negativity that you feel around you as you're sitting in that waiting area, just quietly observing people coming through? So don't arrive late, get there a little bit early. When you're in the interview, do not try to wing it with no real preparation. You are getting yourself engaged in the kiss of death if you go in there and try on the fly to make it up as you go along with no preparation about the company, what this job is about, some of the legacy, some of the news about the company, maybe something about the strategy that that company has and that they've posted on their website. When you go in there, do not think that you're God's gift to this company. You're not going to really resonate well with the interviewers if you feel yourself to be the most important person on the face of the earth. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not telling you go in there looking as if you're somebody in sackcloth and ashes and trying your best to be as small as possible. Don't do that. Don't do that at all. But don't go in there with a significant amount of cockiness. It's not going to work for you when you get into the interview situation. And in the interview, do not babble. Don't babble and babble and babble and babble. When they ask you a question, answer the question intelligently. But you do not need to answer the question for 20 minutes. Most interviews today last about 40 to 45 minutes. And what they do then is they open it up for spontaneous questions that may have come up in the minds of the interviewers, or that you have that you would like to ask them. And a thing I will counsel you about in advance is this: you do not win an interview based on the answers you give to the questions they ask. You win that job based on the questions you ask them about the company, about the context, about the environment, about the organization. That's an important thing for you to keep in mind. Of course, you've got to answer their questions well. But what they're looking to see out of you is, do you have enough interest in this job, and have you enough invested in it that you took the time to think your way into the job, into the role, and what it's going to be like to actually work there? So I've talked about a few don'ts, things that you should not be doing when it comes to the interview that you're going to be doing. First of all, I told you about arriving on time. And that's really important. So what is the first do? Arrive on time. Make sure you arrive on time. Call ahead if you're going to be late. That's also a very gracious thing to do. Let them know in advance, look, I'm stuck on the highway or I'm in the subway and there's some kind of a delay. I reckon that I'm going to be about 10 or 15 minutes late. And apologize for it and ask them if it's still convenient for them to meet with you, or should you reschedule another time with them. That gives them a chance to see a significant amount of responsibility in you and commitment to trying to do the right things in order to serve the organization, including when you're not going to deliver to a time frame you've committed to, letting them know you're not going to and why you're not going to. Another thing that you need to do, and that is learn everything you can about the role, everything you can about the company and the industry that this organization is in. And with the internet, you can pretty much find out anything you want to. You need to be able to go in there with knowledge about the company. Don't show up without having looked at their website, without having pondered news items in Google about this particular organization, public sector, private sector, whatever it is. Don't go in there without knowing what the competitive environment is that that company is involved in. It's important for you to know that because it helps you to show them that you don't just want the job, you've taken the time to really understand what they're up against and what you would be up against in delivering with excellence in the role that you're applying for. Learn about the company, learn about the industry. Now just think about it this way, for instance. You're going in 2016 to interview for a company that's in the oil and gas industry. Well, just think about that. Think about the crisis this industry has been in with the plummeting oil prices worldwide, the significant layoffs that are happening. And when you go in there, think about the kind of cultural realities you're going to be faced with working in an oil and gas company, where the ultimate demand is going to be delivering to very stringent timelines and also showing immediate value as an employee when you walk through the door. It's really important for you to go in with knowledge that you yourself can take the time to be able to put together for yourself. When you go in there too, do be flexible. Sometimes people go into interviews and they go in with this mindset. I'm worth $100,000 and I'm not going to take a penny less. And I don't care what they say. If I am being offered $90,000, I'm not going to take the job on. And the other thing is, I'm going to ask them how much money they're paying for this job as soon as I am in the interview. So I get that out of the way as quickly as possible. And I am not going to be flexible because it's going to be an insult to my integrity if they offer me anything less than I want. If you go in there with that degree of inflexibility, you will leave the room with that degree of inflexibility, and you will leave the room with no job. So go in there and have a good sense of what your parameters are for how flexible you can be. If they become very stringent on a wage that's not exactly what you were looking for, then start to see what you can negotiate as time goes by around additional things like training and so on and so forth. Now, you're not likely to talk about money in the first interview. And my suggestion to you is don't raise the issue of money when you go in for an initial interview, but be flexible. Now, I'm going to tell you a story that's a true story about a colleague of mine and her experience with a young professional who came in the door for an interview. This was for a job working in her department, I reckon probably as a project manager. And the person came in the door, and this is what my colleague saw. A young man who brought in with him what looked like a half-gallon Starbucks coffee and what looked like another half-gallon bottle of water, and he plunked them both down on the table, bam, bam, in front of him, on either side of him. He had not really taken the time to cut his fingernails particularly well, so they were kind of long and they were kind of dirty. He came in, he didn't have a jacket on, he didn't have anything that looked like formal wear. He basically just had a pair of cotton slacks, and he had a long sleeve shirt with the sleeves rolled up to above his elbow, and he had the collar unbuttoned up to about halfway down his chest. He was absolutely full of himself, cocky, arrogant, a little bit shy of disrespectful, and there was a particular point in time in the interview where my colleague asked this young man, so you're applying for this job, and I'm just going to make up a name, Fred. You're applying for this job, Fred, and should you be the candidate that we select, what kinds of things might we have to look at growing and developing you in so that you will really, have the chance to show real excellence in this job? And this is what Fred said. Fred said to my colleague, that's just that question people ask about what are your weaknesses. And I gotta tell you, I'm pretty good with how I am. I'm okay with the way I am. I don't think I need you to work on anything. As you can well imagine, Fred left there with his ego intact, but he certainly didn't get the job. And that's what I mean when I say be flexible. Be open to guidance and coaching when you talk to the people who interview you. These days, the way it works is you might get a pre-screen phone call from an HR representative who'll call, talk to you, ask you how you heard about the job, tell me about yourself, tell me about why you're interested in this job, and those sorts of questions. Well, if that goes well, they will then recommend that you be brought to the table for a second interview. And these days, it's usually a panel interview. And it might be the hiring manager with the HR person who spoke to you, and maybe another colleague that the hiring manager brings to the table. Well, if they really like what they see, they'll bring you in for a third interview, more than likely. And that'll be with the hiring manager and his boss, usually a director or an associate VP or a VP or even a CEO, depending on where you're going and what you're applying for. After all that is done, what happens is HR calls you up with an offer. And that's when you get the chance to do your negotiations. So, as I've just told you, you're talking 3 or 4 meetings before you get to touch on the area of money. What may happen is right up front, the HR person, the human resources person may say to you, look, what kind of expectations do you have around money? And then you say, well, my goal is to be able to land a role where I am doing something that is meaningful to me, but I'm looking at a wage based on my experience and based on my knowledge and my certifications and education of $100,000. So that gives her or him a number to work with. And then they take it from there. Another thing I want you to do, apart from arriving on time, calling ahead if you're late, and learning everything you can about the role, the company, and the industry, and being flexible, is send a thank you note after the interview. The thank you note is a wonderful bit of professional graciousness. When you do that, it's sort of a high integrity and it's a classy thing to do. And don't go on and on and on in the message. It can be as simple as, I appreciate the fact that you all took time out of a very busy schedule to meet with me. I think this role is one that I'm very, very intrigued by and excited at the opportunity to be able to land, and I can guarantee you that I would add value from the very first day and would be a significant contributor to your company. Now, that's a simple message. It's to the point, and it says buckets about you and what you're made of. And it really sends a significant message to the organization that's looking at you as a potential candidate. All right. The next big thing you need to do is prepare. It's just like doing a role at Stratford and you're playing Shakespeare. You do not get on stage to play Macbeth or Lady Macbeth without knowing the script. You've got to understand the play, what it's made of, what are the motivations of the characters in that play, what's the geographical context, what's the historical context, what is the kind of motivation and trigger that's operating in Macbeth. How is that different in Lady Macbeth? Now that's just for a role as an actor. When you're going into a job, it's the same thing. What is this company like to work in? Have I had the chance to reach out to and take someone to coffee who already works there? Have I taken the time to even do something that you might call an informational interview? In other words, you see a position or you see a company you'd love to work for, and you contact the HR group and say, I'd love to have the chance to have an informational interview, which is just basically the opportunity to talk to somebody in HR about the company, about its business, about its clients, its competitive environment, that kind of thing. So preparation is really, really important. Winging it in an interview is deadly. Some people still think that's what you do. I'm telling you today, given the competitive environment that you need to be able to play in as a millennial, you have got to take the time to prepare really well. So how should you look when you go into an interview? Now, I talked to you about Fred and his kind of self-preparation and the way he prepared to look when he went into that particular conversation. And Fred was in no way, shape, or form anything that you might remotely call impressive. Does that mean then that you've got to wear a tuxedo? No, you don't. Today, the way it tends to work is you wear something that is nice by the company's standards. Hear what I just said. By the company's standards. If you're going to go into Silicon Valley and you're going to go into an interview, do not wear a tie. Don't wear a tie for a Silicon Valley interview if the company tends to be people who don't wear ties at all. If you were, for instance, going to work for the big CEO of Virgin, Richard Branson, he thinks that ties should be outlawed. So don't wear a tie if you're going to be interviewed by any of the Virgin companies. But there are other ones that are more traditional. So if you're going to apply for a job in a bank, I'd encourage you to wear a tie to that interview. And then just look at the people that show up at the interview. If the people at the interview don't wear ties, then you can count on the fact that when you're working there, they're looking for something called business casual. So a nice pair of pants, a nice shirt, and you're good to go. But for the interview at a bank, wear a tie because it shows respect for the people that are there. Don't overdress. You don't have to be wearing, an Armani suit and come dressed with $5,000 worth of finery. Don't do that either. Don't overdress. Don't underdress. But look nice by the company's standards. For the interview, you want to be just a cut above what they usually dress like so that when you come there, you've adjusted slightly down as opposed to a big plummet down or a big plummet up. Imagine if Fred wanted to work in a bank, what he would have to adjust to go in there in the way he presents himself. And you might say, look, I don't care about all this clothing nonsense. That's a bunch of rubbish. That's just for you old fools like Dev Rantran and company to worry about. We don't have to worry about that. Well, you do, because how you portray yourself in the way you dress is going to give a significant visual cue to the people that are around you about whether you mean business or not. Your level of commitment and professionalism. All of these are communicated in how you present yourself to people. So, don't go in there with long, dirty nails. Do not plonk a big Starbucks and a big bottle of water on the table. And, just don't do things like that when you're in this interview. Okay, so let's move on. When you go into the interview, what should be in your head going into that interview? Well, there's a couple of things. You need to be thinking about some things that are important to you. One, what do you have as specific career values that you want honored? I'll give you an example of what I mean. If you are a highly interpersonal individual who values relationships and who feels that the most important thing that you can be remembered for down the pipe is that you really built profoundly strong and rich and meaningful relationships with the people that you worked with, ensure that the culture that you are looking for in that business honors relationships, honors interpersonal integrity, and encourages an environment where people are able to be like that with each other. There are some financial organizations, particularly major investment firms, where that is the last thing that they're interested in. And if you're a person for whom the career value of interpersonal relationships is extremely important, you're going to be miserable there. So go in with a sense of what your career values are, what's important to you for you to be happy in your job, and then evaluate, is this company going to have the kind of culture that will be good for me and the kind of person I am? Go in with a good sense of what your assets are. In other words, what kind of experience do you have? What kind of things have you done in your life? What kinds of volunteer work have you been involved in? What kinds of training have you got? Now, I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. All right? There was a person once who, he was a philosophy major. And when he was at university, he came out with a philosophy degree. And when I was talking to him, he kind of felt, well, gosh, I'm trying to get this job in this particular industry, but my degree is in philosophy. And I don't know, maybe it was a waste of time. And I said to him, hang on a second, just think about what you just said. I have a degree in philosophy. Well, what is philosophy? It is the most complex arena of human thought, stretching back through to ancient times, where you are dealing with the major concepts affecting people's lives, language, interaction, etc., etc. And for you to be able to take that and translate it into a thesis, or translate it so that other people can understand, you've got to not only understand the complexity of the philosophers, but you have to understand how to take that and break it down small so any audience can understand. So your great learning in getting your degree in philosophy was the art of translating complexity to simplicity. Did you do that? And he said, absolutely, that is what I did. So I said, so you need to see your degree not as a handicap, but find a way to show the richness of it in the interview. So there you are. You're applying for a job and you're going into a particular role. And the role is going to involve, you becoming somebody who is managing other people. And some person in the interview panel looks at your resume and says, well, Fred, I notice you got a degree in philosophy. So, well, how does that equip you to be a manager in our organization? And this is what you can say. My degree qualifies me and gives me some support in being a good manager because the translation of complex principles into something that can be understood by anyone in the street is exactly aligned with the translation of strategic ideas and concepts and goals so that my staff working with me can understand it at the ground level. That's what that degree does for me. That's a great answer. What happens? The interviewer says, I really like what this guy just said to me. I think she might be good for us, this woman we've just been talking to. Did you hear that answer she gave about the philosophy degree? And that then gives you a real sense of, wow, this is going to be a job that I can actually land, because they don't just see me as somebody who may not be a good fit. They see how I can transfer what I've learned already in my career to this new job and what it entails. All right. When you're doing this interview, think about the problem, the business problem that this role is addressing. If you think about it, and you think about it very carefully, you'll be able to see every job that exists in an organization exists to fix a business problem, a problem that the organization is struggling to be able to work with. So people that are in finance are working to address financial issues, the gaps that could occur if somebody is not managing the money of the company that they have become a steward for or that has been entrusted to them properly, or the investments of the firm, whatever the case may be. If you're somebody who's working in operations, then you are managing a series of problems related to sustaining and keeping the lights on, keeping systems running, keeping services available to the customers that are being served. Think about the business problem that your role is addressing, and imagine the kinds of issues that could come up in the job. All right? Sometimes a job is related to providing a service. Sometimes it's about plugging an operational hole. Sometimes it's about changing a culture. Changing a culture is sometimes why a job is created. We want people in this organization that are more interpersonal and come from outside of banking, because the people that we are working with in the banking industry tend to be of a certain mindset, and that's not helping us right now. So changing of culture can be a problem that's being addressed. Sometimes the problem that's being addressed is serving brand new clients or providing brand new services. Figure out what that problem is so that in the interview you can ask questions and give answers that are dealing with taking care of the problem. All right? Next, reflect on the organization's situation in its industry and in its sector. What's the reputation of the organization? Where do you find that? Google. Go Google it. Find out what you can find out. How is it performing relative to its competitors? What are some of the key constraints this organization is up against? What major changes have occurred recently? Has there been a massive reorg? Has a division been cut? Have they outsourced services to India or to China or to Brazil? What does its strategic plan look like? And is it a realistic plan? And you might think, man, I don't know if I've got the qualifications to understand that. Well, take the strategic plan, print it off, and go talk to a few people who might know. You're bound to know some people who would be able to look at that. And then another thing you want to ask yourself about the organization situation is, how responsive to change is it? How are decisions made in this organization? So we've talked about a few things that I want you to keep in mind when you are going into an interview as a millennial. Don't sell yourself short. You've got all kinds of stuff to offer an organization. But at the same time, don't go in there like cocky Fred, who lost the job and never even had a chance because of his attitude and the way that he went in. So that's it for now for this particular subject. This is part 1. And I hope you listen in to part 2 and then the other 2 parts that we're going to be doing related to millennials and some things that you need to consider as you're going out there to find new work.
Well, that's our show. Thank you for joining us here at Career Cravings. Tune in to our show in 2 weeks, same place and time. We wish you the career you deserve. Until next time.